Here's something many people don't realize. You don't need an Investec private bank account to save with Investec. Their personal cash investments are available from 100,000 Rand and designed for capital preservation. In markets like these, having a low-risk cash component alongside equities is simply sensible, particularly if you're over 55.
Those two levies combined add to about R6.35 per litre, and a 50% reduction in each would come to a R3.17 reduction at the pump.
Some good news at last, perhaps anyway, from Dr. Mark Burke. He is the DA's spokesman on finance, and he's gunning for a cut in the petrol price when the increase comes around next week. And it without the cut that the DA has recommended, it'll be as high as R6 a litre for petrol, R9, perhaps even R10 a litre for diesel. And that's already that's continuing with a subsidy, because the under recovery at the moment, according to DME, that's the state, is R7.38 on petrol and R15 on diesel. Something has to be done to stop this economy hitting a brick wall. And Mark Burke reckons he's got the answer to it. We'll have more on that later in the program. Good morning and welcome to the BizNews Daybreak. Today's Thursday, the 26th of March, 2026. I'm Alec Hogg, and let's kick off with our partners at Bloomberg News Now for the very freshest news, a lot of which is still focusing on the war in Iran, which goes into day 27 today.
Peace talks with Iran are ongoing, despite Tehran publicly rejecting American overtures and issuing fresh conditions to end the conflict. Rosemary Kalanick is the director of the Middle East program at Defense Priorities.
Trump's ceasefire plans are not a ceasefire, right? These are, Iran gave these counter proposals that are ceasefire proposals, what needs to happen for hostilities to cease. The U.S. is trying to negotiate a whole comprehensive package, which most countries don't agree to do in the middle of a war, because if they did, it would just incentivize other countries attacking them. So the U.S. and Iran they're operating on totally different levels here. And the U.S. side is pretty disconnected from reality.
Rosemary Kalanick, director of the Middle East program at Defense Priorities. The Iranian parliament is said to be working on a draft bill to charge a fee in exchange for providing security to ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. That's according to the semi-official Fars news agency. The agency says the plan is expected to be finalized next week. President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping will be holding their summit in Beijing on May 14th through the 15th, following a delay due to the war with Iran. Here's Bloomberg's Mario Parker asking White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt about the Iran war timeline.
Just given that the president postponed his original trip to China because of the war, should we infer that the war will be wound down and concluded by the time of that May 15th, 14th visit?
Again, as I've said, we've always estimated approximately 4 to 6 weeks. So you could do the math on that, Mario. But we do look forward. I know the president looks forward to going to China on May 14th and 15th.
Leavitt also went on to say that Xi will visit Washington at a date later this year. President Trump has named several tech industry titans to a new council that will focus on artificial intelligence policy and other science-related issues. And with more, here's Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini.
President Trump has appointed Mark Zuckerberg of Meta Platforms, venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, Oracle's Larry Ellison, and NVIDIA's Jensen Huang to a new presidential technology council that will focus on AI policy and other science-related issues. The president's Council of Advisors on Science and Tech will be chaired by David Sachs, the venture capitalist now serving as Trump's AI and crypto czar, along with White House Science and Tech Policy Director Michael Kratsios. The council, the latest indicator of the nexus between Silicon Valley and Trump's second administration, administration as industry leaders embrace his push to lower regulatory and tax burdens and boost U.S. standing in cutting-edge fields. In New York, Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
It was an up day for Wall Street. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. Ted Neild is Chief Investment Officer at Gresham Partners, and he says he is surprised by the market's resilience.
Today, we sit year to date within a stone's throw of being flat, which is just absolutely remarkable in terms of resilience. I know we're going up and down by a couple percentage points, and it's a lot of volatility, but it really is amazingly resilient.
The S&P 500 index gained 0.5% to wrap up the Wednesday session at 65.91. The Dow up 0.7%, higher by 305 points. NASDAQ up 0.8%.
Did you get that on the Tech Council? Here you've got Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Meta. He's the reason why we got Facebook and WhatsApp. Larry Ellison from Oracle, one of the richest men in the world, whose son is in the process of buying Disney. He owns or runs Paramount. And Jensen Huang, who runs NVIDIA, the biggest and the richest company in the world, the most valuable company in the world. And that panel is chaired by David Sachs, a South African, one of our exports, another one of our exports that's gone to the United States. He's going to be telling these guys what to do. That is the standing that he has. My goodness, but our SAFers are doing well around the world. It's not just when you think of Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, being a South African. Here's another one, David Sachs, who's also very, very highly regarded in the tech industry globally. And here he is, chairing Trump's Tech Council. Man, you got to be proud of your country, don't you? Well, let's get back to the war now. Also from Bloomberg is the economics senior geoeconomist, and his name is Adam Farrer. And he gave some insight on the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast on why the markets are so positive, despite many of the big guys coming out, the Wall Street titans coming out and saying, these markets are a little stronger than they should be.
So it certainly seems that the markets are moving on the vibes of the president and the president alone, notwithstanding the fact that it is probably unfair to judge exclusively on how the Iranians are responding publicly to these conversations.
Tell us why.
Because the reality is the Iranians have a lot of constituencies they have to handle, and particularly with a hardline leadership that is taking control, they have to be very careful as to how they articulate the next steps in this conflict. On one hand, we're absolutely right, and this narrative we've talked about here at Bloomberg a lot is that the Iranians feel more empowered now than they have at any point during the war. They feel like the pressure is building on the United States, not on them. They're still taking a lot of hits, but that the energy consequences of the Strait of Hormuz remaining closed will hurt the United States and our partners globally more than Iran. That said, they are taking a lot of hits, right? Iran is getting battered by an ongoing air campaign that has not let up, as you said in the intro. And so there are reasons for them to want to bring this to a close on their own timeline. And even though they, over the last 48 hours, we had them saying, we're not talking, we're not even engaging, there are now indications that someone's talking, right? And it does look like there was some element of showing they were talking to the right people with the administration by allowing one vessel through the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. Again, trying to start this conversation. But the proof will be if substantive conversations really move forward in this conversation now about maybe J.D. Vance leading a U.S. delegation to Pakistan.
Well, I managed to get hold of Dr. Mark Burke yesterday. He was in Parliament giving some questions to the minister, but I'd liked to find out from him how the DA expects or anticipates that they can cut the big hit that we're going to be taking on petrol at the end of the month. In fact, next week, the petrol price will go up. We haven't been given the confirmation yet, but from DME, the average increase in the petrol price for the month of March has been R5.72 to date. And that means that the way that it always works in the past is that gets added to the petrol price. Then you can add the increase in the fuel levy, which was announced in the budget. You're talking about $6. So 6 Rand higher per litre, which is a 30% increase. We pay about 20 Rand a litre now. Diesel's worse. You're looking at 10 Rand on diesel that's coming in next week. We're paying about, the same price. So that's about a 50% increase. Those are almost guaranteed to give this economy the kind of shock that it really cannot afford to have. And Mark Burke is hard at work trying to find a way out of it. A little bit like what he did when he was leading the charge from the Democratic Alliance on the VAT increase proposal. He did manage to get that one sorted out. Maybe this Cambridge doctorate holder and very successful businessman who had a startup, did well out of it, and was able then to retire very young and go into politics for the best of the rest of us. Well, have a listen to what Mark is busy doing.
We are proposing a 50% reduction in both the general fuel levy as well as the road accident fund levy. Now, those two levies combined add to about R6.35 per litre, and a 50% reduction in each would come to a R3.17 reduction at the pump, which means that if the price goes up to by almost R6 in a week, then we would have been able to cushion at least R3.17 out of that. But it's a pretty radical proposal, but also, in our estimation, a necessary one given what South Africans are facing.
Yeah, it's radical, but if you just step back from it, if you had a business that was going through a similar situation, you would look for cutting costs somewhere. When politicians get in, they get something, it never goes down. It seems to always go up. But why has it taken the DA to actually think this one through? It's pretty obvious. We've got to do something as a nation. The Treasury says they haven't got money. But you have now looked at it in a more innovative way.
Just to your earlier point, taxes always seem to go up, and government always seems to creep with its attempts at gaining power. And so it is concerning that these things always go up, and at a cost of crisis juncture in this country's trajectory, we have to reassess it. So what we've come up with is the 50% reduction across the two, but it is a cost of 6.5 billion rand a month to the fiscus that would have to come from somewhere. Now, we've also incidentally just passed the fiscal framework yesterday, which is a month-long process in planning and execution through the two houses of parliament. And even though that fiscal framework is passed, and as it should have been, we need to now respond to this global shock. And so what we've proposed to fund this 6.5 billion rand a month is a set of various pots of money where from the compensation fund, they've got surpluses that accumulate, and every year Treasury gives them permission to retain those surpluses. And this is at an entity that is poorly managed and has questionable audit outcomes. So in the 24-25 year, the compensation fund had a 21.7 billion rand surplus that they applied to retain. That alone would give us 3 months worth of breathing room for this relief. Again, doesn't change the fiscal framework we've passed. Likewise, CETA's, in their latest report, indicate that they've 6.7 billion in annual surpluses. So it gives you another month and brings you up to 4 months of breathing room. And the TARS program over the medium term has indicated they would be able to save 12 billion, which would give you another 2 months of breathing room. So as of this morning, we've proposed to Treasury and the Minister and the President at least 6 months worth of funding for relief that doesn't increase taxes for South Africans and also doesn't increase the fiscus's debt burden to fund this relief.
Well, more strength to your elbow, Mark Burke. And man, isn't it good to have people like that representing us in Parliament. Moving on, though, you can get that full interview on the BizNews, on the various BizNews channels, and I strongly recommend that you do so.
Good news from Southern Africa. BizNews partner DCC Hotel Group showcases world-class hospitality across the region. We spotlight more than 100 carefully selected lodges supporting tourism, local communities and conservation. Here in Hermanus, whale watching and coastal charm await. Your home for the BizNews Conference 2026.
Craig Warriner, that's a name that BizNews Tribe members would know very well. He's a con man, a Ponzi scheme operator. He had a trust called BHI. Apparently it was Berkshire Hathaway, was what it stood for, using every trick in the book to suck money away from people. And in traditional Ponzi manner, you pay him, he then gives you a high rate of interest, not too high so you get suspicious, and he uses the income that comes from the new investors to keep the scheme going. That's how Ponzi's work. Anyway, Craig Warriner preyed a great deal on the old boys of St. Stithians, old boys and old girls, the old Boys and Girls Association, OSA, decided to even take money from him for the school's gym, and it was renamed the Craig Warriner High Performance Center. I kid you not. He's in jail, and this is after he gave himself up. And last Friday, there was a vote to see whether Warriner could be ejected from the Old Pupils Association. It was motivated by Ian McLeod, who I spoke to yesterday. A fascinating story, and let's just hear why Ian did what he did and the surprising result.
The vote was lost. So I think it was 18 people voted against expulsion, 16 voted for expulsion, and for some reason, 6 people turned up on a Friday evening to abstain. So the upshot is that what I think is a small, very vocal lobby turned out to prevent the expulsion of Warriner. And I'm still trying to work out precisely why, but I have some ideas.
Okay, well, give us those ideas, because that sounds astonishing. I mean, here's a guy who's defrauded the community. He then goes to the police station, hands himself in. He's sitting in jail, so there's no question that he did run a Ponzi scheme, and yet a majority of those who bothered to turn up on a Friday night actually voted to keep him as part of the association. It sounds real weird.
Yes, and I increasingly hear that from more and more alumni who are now hearing about this and coming out and expressing that same shock. And this alumni body tends to be a little bit slack, but I think people are now coming out, and I suspect the majority is in favor of expulsion. As far as I can tell, there are 2 sort of broad reasons which people are mentioning. One is procedural. One, there seems to be a concern that the Constitution is too broad. If people want guidelines, etc. I have very little sympathy for this. Firstly, you have to read the Constitution as if the framers knew what they were doing and acted with purpose. This is the provision as it is. If we want more details, good idea, we should do that prospectively. Another reason that gets bandied about is the term used as membership for life. It sounds like it's motivated by something like mercy or something like that. Again, I have very little, in fact, no sympathy for this. I think that explanation comes down to what Gad Saad calls suicidal empathy. But again, I think it's a very small, loud minority who turned up to prevent the expulsion. And I think the majority of the alumni body have been spurred into action. And I'm talking with old boys, from the youngsters with their broccoli haircuts to the old bullies with the dad bods. And there's a great deal of action now to defend the school and to defend all of our individual reputations.
Ian McLeod has written a story on that, which will be published on BizNews this morning. But I guess maybe we should think about the bigger picture here. There were 40 people who voted. It's an online vote. It's not like you had to go anywhere. There are thousands of members of the Old Pupils Association at St. Stithians. Warriner is a stain on the school's reputation. Yet only 40 people bothered to go there. And all you needed was 18 highly motivated friends of Warriner, who then voted to keep him as a member of the association. It boggles the mind, doesn't it? Well, something else that boggles the mind is what's happening in Zimbabwe, to the north of us. The mayor of Bulawayo, David Coltart, spoke yesterday to my colleague Chris Steyn about the arrest of Tendai Biti. Tendai Biti used to be the finance minister in the government of national unity, or such that it was at some point in time, before Mnangagwa took over complete control. Tendai Biti said that the proposed change in the constitution of Zimbabwe is wrong and it should not be allowed. This proposed change is going to effectively allow Mnangagwa to be president for life, and that you wouldn't have the public being involved in appointing the president. That's what the effect of it is. But let's have a listen to what David Coltart said to Chris, or a highlight of what he said to Chris yesterday. Once again, you can pick up the full interview on the BizNews channels.
Clearly, the arrest of Tendai Biti was contrived, was used to punish him for opposing these amendments. But clearly now, given the bail conditions, has been used to ensure that he contributes no further to the debate which is swirling in the country around this amendment bill.
So with his voice effectively silenced now, what impact will that have on other members of the opposition fighting these proposed changes?
Well, it has a chilling effect on everyone. And let me also say that the arrest of Tendai Biti hasn't come in a vacuum. I was meant to contribute to a debate in Bulawayo 2 or 3 weeks ago. That meeting was banned. Another fellow lawyer, Lovemore Moduku, was set upon by ZANU-PF thugs a few weeks ago and badly beaten and tortured. He ended up in hospital as a result of that. And so one needs to see this in this broader context, that it is designed to have a chilling effect on activists who are opposed to these constitutional amendments, but also to the general public. In the coming days, starting on the 30th of March, there's a period of 3 to 4 days when parliamentarians will be going countrywide to engage in this process of explaining the bill to the general public and getting the views of the public. And there's no doubt in my mind that ZANU-PF are busy preparing their own supporters to come to these hearings. But given what has happened in the last few weeks with the beatings and the arrests, that acts as a chilling effect for those who are opposed to the bill, and therefore will mean that this process of public hearings in itself has been undermined by this.
If these constitutional amendments make it, it would mean that the current president could be in power until 2030. Is that correct?
Well, it extends not just the president, but the existing parliamentarians, and even in theory, me as a councillor, our terms in office are extended by 2 years. It's a very grim prospect that we face in the country, because in essence, what we are seeing is a constitutional coup. I think that ZANU-PF has looked at what has happened in Tanzania and Uganda and the fallout of such violent elections, and they've decided just to avoid elections, quite frankly, for another 2 years. And if they extend now by a further 2 years, what's to stop them just extending their terms even further beyond that?
And lest we forget, Emmerson Mnangagwa, the president of Zimbabwe, who became president in a coup, nobody voted for him. There was an election which many people say was heavily rigged. He's 83 years old, and he wants to continue to be president for at least another 2 years, and after that, who knows? There are interesting things happening in the world. And lest we forget what was going on in Iran, or if you don't know or don't care, well, do yourself a favor and go and watch Iraj Abedian's interview and his keynote address at the BizNews conference to get a little bit of insight on the history and the background, so that you don't just make an opinion, but you come from a position with some context on it. Before we go, the international markets are, well, okay on Wall Street last night. You had the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 index making about a 0.5 percentage point improvement. So quite a bit of green there. But in Japan this morning, the Nikkei Dow is down about 0.5%. The rand starts at 16 Rand 97 against the US dollar. Gold and Bitcoin were both pretty flat. Gold around $4,500. Bitcoin just under $71,000 per Bitcoin. Well, that wraps up today's edition of the BizNews Daybreak. Thanks for starting your Thursday with us. For more in-depth analysis, the full interviews, and the latest markets movements, make sure that you head over to biznews.com. You can also pick up on BizNews TV, that's on YouTube, or on your favorite podcast channel, BizNews Radio. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your audio so that you never miss an episode. I'm taking a short break over, well, a nice long weekend ahead of the Easter weekend, and the team will be looking after Daybreak tomorrow and on Monday. But I'll be back again on Tuesday. Until then, cheerio. When it comes to savings, we spend a lot of time discussing returns and interest rates, but not enough time asking why we're saving in the first place. That's the thinking behind Investec's #What'sYourWhy campaign that's been running. If your goal is stability or peace of mind, their personal cash investment is accessible from 100,000 Rand, and you don't need to bank with them. Whatever your reason for saving, Investec understands that.